CorelDRAW tips and tricks. Today's session, the basics, text, part 1, brought to you by Condi Systems. In this session, we're going to talk about some of the very basic elements of text. We have lots to talk about. Even when we look at the basics, we have a great deal to talk about. So let's get started. What is text? Well, text, of course, is letters. We can do all kinds of different things with text. If we click on the text tool, we get an interesting cursor. When we go out into space, we click on the open space and we can type. That's simple enough. But there's a great deal more about text than just typing a few letters. Let's look at this piece of text. If we look at the top of the page, we can see that this is a font called Times Roman. We are looking at 75 point. We'll talk about that in a minute, but that is the size, the height of the text. If it helps you, you can look over here and you can see that that text is 0.722 inches high. Not quite 3/4 of an inch, but pretty close. To try and find a correlation between point size and actual inches is something that can be very tricky. With basic fonts like Times Roman, they're pretty close. But for other fonts, you'll find they're way off, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. The length of that line of text is 6.677 inches. Now, there are a lot of things we can do with that text without having any great knowledge. You probably know already that you can go up to the top and you can make that text bold. You can make it italicized, or you can underline it. Now, not all fonts will give you those three capabilities. So far as I'm aware, all of them will allow you to underline them, but only selected fonts will actually allow you to make them bold or italicize them. We can also look at this box, which is horizontal alignment. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then if we jump over here, we can see that we can look at text properties. That comes up as a docker. There's all kinds of properties you can look at. Or we can go here and edit text. We'll come back to that in a minute. And this tells us that this is what is called an open face type. There are several types of fonts that we use in CorelDRAW. The most common in modern versions is open face. The older types, which still work just fine, are true types, and there are also Adobe fonts. Other companies will also create fonts and use all kinds of strange names to go with them. But most of them work in Corel, and they do pretty well. Text comes into CorelDRAW as a unique animal. It is text. It is not a piece of clip art. It is not a bitmap. It is not an object. It is text. Because of that, there are a number of things we can do with text that makes it more interesting. First of all, we can change the color. We always select the text using the pick tool, and then we can go over to the color bar and we can change the text. To change text color, we do a left mouse click. But we're not done. We can also do something else to contribute to the variety of text that we can use, and that is we can go back over to our color bar and do a right click. A right click gives us an outline on the text. The outline that normally comes in is about 1/1000th of an inch, called hairline. We can increase that, though, by going down and making that 1/2 point, or 3/4 of a point, or If the flyout menu doesn't give you what you want, you can go to the outline pen and you can type in whatever it is you do want. Let's put in 0.85. The outline color can be changed just like the interior can. The only difference is we use a right click instead of a left. Now, there are a couple of things here that are very important. If you put an outline on text and just leave it pretty much alone, or even enlarge it, you're not going to have much in the way of problems. But if you want to reduce it, and let's take this way down, and then we'll zoom in on it, you can see what's happened. It's a disaster. So let's zoom back out and let's undo our text, and let's do one more step before we change the size of it. We're going to select it with our pick tool. Then we're going to go to the outline pen tool just like we did a minute ago. Click on that. Go to outline pen, and now we're going to go down here and we're going to say scale with object. Click OK, and now as we reduce the size of the text, it will also reduce the width of the outline. So it always stays proportional. Now we're going to undo a couple of these things and zoom back out because I want to show you something else that happens with text. And we're going to go back in here and we're going to tell it don't do that. And now we're going to do a fill on the text that is nice and bright so we can see it, and then we're going to do a outline, and now we're going to tell it we want a really thick outline. Whoops, what happened? Well, if we zoom in, you can see that the outline has taken over the text. But there's a way to fix that, and that is to tell it that we want it to do not only scale with the object, but we want it to always put the outline behind the fill. And now we have the ability to do some very interesting things with text. It only takes one step to do it rather than doing multiple pieces, which I'll show you in a little bit. But this gives us a nice border around our text. We can change the color of it just by a click of the mouse. We can change the fill still by a click of the mouse. And we can change the thickness of the outline by going back over here and using one of these drop-ins. Or we can go to outline pen and we can type in whatever it is we actually want. So, very easy way to put an outline on text. Give us multiple colors. This is great for working with schools that use blue and white for their school colors, or orange and black, or green and yellow, or whatever it might be. You can get the school colors in the text very easily, very quickly, and you can still edit the text. As you can see. So, that's a trick about text. Let's look at one other. Let's go back to using no outline, just using text, and let's do an offset background. In this case, we're going to duplicate this piece of text, and that's done by hitting Control D, and that will duplicate our text. Now we're going to raise that up out of the way, and we're going to go back to the original, which is always going to be behind the copy. So we're going to take that and put an outline on it. We're going to fill it with black, and then we're going to go over here and make it a much bigger outline. And now we're going to take this copy of the text and we can make a shadow text out of it. Very easy, very simple. The only problem with this is if you need to edit it, you'll have to edit both copies of the text in order to get it to work right. But still, I use this all the time with Sublimation. It works great, especially if you have a very busy background and you want the text to stand out. You can put a white or a black background and then use the text color that you want. Let's move down the page here just a little bit and talk about points. Point size. In order to understand point size, you have to understand a little bit about the text. First of all, we have the body of the text, which is on a baseline. Secondly, we have descenders. And you can see we've put a line at the bottom of the descender. We have also put a line at the top of the ascender. And in this case, the capitals actually go higher than the ascenders. So we've put a line up there as well. Now, in order to measure the point size of this particular line of text, we have to start at the highest point and the lowest point. The distance between those is the text size. In this case, we can come up and see that it is 42 points. Now, what is a point? Well, that's been a debate for many, many years, and here's the story that supposedly goes with it. After movable type was created, someone went into the printer and said, "We need a way to measure type." And so the printer picked up 4 sheets of paper. Now this was in the 1600s. 4 pieces of handmade paper, put them together and said, "That's 1 point." 8 sheets of paper is 2 points, and so on. So points are not very precise from the beginning. And if you look at different types of text, even though you make them the same size on the screen, you'll find that they're referred to as different point sizes. This is especially true with scripts, with novelty fonts, and things like that. The computer world has kind of simplified this for basic fonts like Arial or Times Roman. 100 points equals 1 inch. Now that's not really points, but that's kind of where things have moved with these basic fonts. You can look at the point size of something and you can know that this particular one, for instance, is about 6/10 of an inch. And if we go over here, sure enough, it's about 6/10 of an inch. But don't depend on that. You've got to stay sharp when you're working with font sizes because they will fool you. Okay, let's go down our page one more time and let's look at one of the big no-nos. Please don't do this. People will come in and ask you to do a sign, a poster, a plaque, whatever, and they want script text, and they want it in all caps. Well, the problem with doing that is it was never intended to be used that way, and you can't read it. Even in the best case scenario with this particular font down here, you can figure out what it is, but it's very hard to read. In order to use fonts correctly, always, when you're working with a script font, use upper and lower case. I recently saw an exterior sign in front of a business that was all done in capital script. And you guessed it, it was a sign shop. I wonder if anyone would ever use them to make signs. The same thing is true with Old English fonts. Old English and German, you can kind of get away with all caps in some words. for instance, the word old, you can figure that one out pretty easily. But how much easier it is to read it in upper and lower case. So please, don't get caught up in that mistake. It makes you look like a true amateur when you do. Alright, here's a neat little thing. Let's look at this. Here's some type I worked in, and I didn't look up while I was typing it, and I typed a whole page of type, and of course you can see that the shift key was locked down and I didn't realize it, and so now I'm going to have to retype this whole thing all over again. And although this one is not very long, if it's an entire page or 2 pages or more, oh my goodness, what a waste of time. But here is the magic of CorelDRAW. Let's select it using our pick tool, and then we can go up to this little window right here that says Edit Text. We can also go to Text, go down the screen a little bit, and you'll see Edit Text. Same thing. Click on it and it brings it into a window. Now we can select that text. Oops. We can select all of that text. There we go. And we can go to Options, Change Case. And now we can make it sentence case, which would make sense for this. All lower, all upper. Title case, which means the first letter of every word is capitalized. Or we can just take all the text that's there and swap it. If it's lowercase, it becomes uppercase. If it's uppercase, it becomes lowercase. And that's exactly what we want to do. And lo and behold, now we don't have to retype that entire sentence. But notice there is a mistake. It did not realize that I is a word. Now let's undo that and go back and do it one more time, and this time let's use Options, Change Case, Sentence Case. And again, it did not pick that up. So we'll have to go in using our text key. We'll click right next to it, do a backspace, a capital I, well, I did it again, a capital I, and now the text is correct. So, easy to change, but demands proofing afterwards. Now there's something else about text like this. This is just regular text typed in, and it has what are called hard returns. At the end of this word, I actually hit the return or enter key. It is also typed, and this is the default, so that it is left justified. If we go up to this little box here that calls itself horizontal alignment, you can see that we can change that from left, which is what it is, to centered. That means every line is centered on the other lines. Or we can justify it to the right. Or we can do a full justify, which means it has a straight margin on both sides. Or we can force it. And what that does, if you'll notice the last word in the paragraph, darn, it has justified that, and where full justified, it realized it was not supposed to do that. Now, the way it does that is by adding space between certain words to make them stretch out. This is done in newspapers and magazines all the time, and they try very hard not to let these spaces get to be too big. And you can help with that if you are willing to use hyphenations. But I'm not. I like the words all in one line, and so this would be acceptable in print, but it would not be very acceptable in sublimation. Sublimation is usually for an award or a gift, and that would just kind of look chintzy. And with that, we'll end part 1. Join us for part 2 as we continue to look at the many uses of text for sublimation. Thanks now.